There are people you should never hate. There are people you should never fight. And there are people you should never try to destroy. But there are also people you should never save, not because you are cruel, not because you lack compassion, and not because you have become cold. There is a difference between someone who makes a mistake and someone who has made their mistake into a lifestyle. Everyone fails. Everyone makes poor decisions. Everyone has moments when judgment disappears and consequences arrive. If you abandon someone because they made one mistake, you are not practicing wisdom. You are practicing impatience. But there comes a point when the mistake stops being an event and becomes a pattern. And patterns tell you more about a person than promises ever will. Think about someone who constantly creates the same crisis. They spend recklessly, then ask you for money. They destroy relationships, then ask you to repair them. They ignore responsibilities, then expect you to solve the consequences. Every time the pressure becomes unbearable, you step in, you give advice, you give money, you make excuses for them, you call someone on their behalf, you clean up the mess. And eventually something strange happens. Your help becomes part of their strategy. They no longer experience the full consequences of their decisions because somewhere in the back of their mind, they know you will appear. This is where kindness can become dangerous. You think you're protecting them from pain, but pain is sometimes the information a person needs to change. Consequences are not always punishment. Sometimes consequences are feedback. They tell a person, this behavior is not working. But if you constantly remove that feedback, the person has no reason to reconsider the behavior. Imagine someone touching a hot surface and getting burned. The pain teaches them something immediately. Next time they hesitate. They become more careful. Now imagine someone touches the same surface, gets burned, and another person immediately treats the injury, removes the danger, and tells them everything is fine. Then they do it again and again. Eventually, the problem isn't simply that they keep touching the surface. The problem is that they have learned there will always be someone available to deal with the damage. This is why you must watch what happens after you help someone. Do they become more responsible? Or do they simply become more comfortable depending on you? A person who genuinely wants to change will eventually use your help as a bridge toward independence. A person who wants to remain the same will use your help as a cushion. Those two situations may look identical in the beginning. The difference appears later. One person becomes stronger. The other becomes more dependent. And you can usually identify the difference by what happens when you stop rescuing them. If they take responsibility, adjust their behavior, and begin solving their own problems, your assistance created growth. If they become angry, blame you, demand more, or immediately create another crisis, your assistance may have created dependence. This doesn't mean you should become cold. It means you should become observant. Don't measure people by how sincerely they apologize. Measure them by what they do after apologizing. Anyone can say, I'll never do it again. The real evidence appears when the same temptation returns. Do they behave differently? Do they change their habits? Do they accept inconvenience? Do they sacrifice comfort to avoid repeating the mistake? Because real change usually has a cost. It requires discipline. It requires discomfort. It requires admitting that the old way wasn't working. And some people don't want change. They want relief. There is a major difference. Relief removes the immediate pain. Change removes the behavior creating the pain. If you always provide relief, a person may never develop the strength required for change. This is why you should never allow guilt to pressure you into endless rescue. You are not cruel for letting someone experience the consequences of their own decisions. You are not selfish for refusing to solve the same problem for the 10th time. And you are not abandoning someone simply because you refuse to participate in their pattern. Sometimes stepping back is the only way to discover whether someone can stand on their own. Let them struggle, let them think, let them make decisions without you rushing in to control the outcome. Because when you constantly save someone from falling, you may accidentally prevent them from learning how to stand. And eventually, you have to ask yourself a difficult question. If I keep rescuing this person, am I actually helping them, or am I helping them remain unchanged? The answer may hurt, but it can also set you free, because you cannot want someone's growth more than they want it themselves. You can encourage them. You can guide them. You can offer one opportunity. You can show compassion, but you cannot carry another person's life forever without eventually losing control of your own. There is a certain type of person who can make you feel important while quietly treating you like a resource. They remember your name when they need a favor. They remember your kindness when they need money. They remember your skills when they need advice. They remember your connections when they need an introduction. But when you need something, suddenly they are busy. When you are struggling, they disappear. When you accomplish something, they may offer a quick congratulations, but when they need something again, they return with perfect timing. This is not always obvious at first. In fact, some of these relationships feel incredibly meaningful because the person knows exactly how to make you feel appreciated when they need access to you. They might say, "You're the only person I can trust." They might tell you how much they value you. They might remind you that you've always been there for them. And because you want to believe the relationship is genuine, you overlook the pattern. But you should never judge a relationship by how someone treats you when they want something from you. Watch how they treat you when they don't need anything. That is where the truth usually becomes visible. A healthy relationship doesn't require a transaction every time you communicate. You can talk without needing something. You can spend time together without asking for favors. You can support each other without keeping score. But when every interaction has an objective, you aren't necessarily dealing with connection. You may be dealing with convenience. And convenience can feel like friendship until you stop being useful. This is why one of the most powerful things you can do is reduce your availability, not as a manipulation, not as a punishment. Simply as an observation, stop immediately answering every request. Stop automatically solving every problem. Stop offering resources before they ask. Stop making yourself endlessly available. Then watch what happens. The person who genuinely values you will still want a relationship with you. The person who only values your usefulness may slowly disappear, and that disappearance gives you information. You don't need to confront them. You don't need to demand an explanation. You don't need to say, "I know you're using me." You simply stop feeding the pattern, because when you remove the benefit, you reveal the intention. There is another dangerous element to these relationships. The more you help someone, the more difficult it becomes to admit that they may not actually value you. You begin defending them. You tell yourself they're just busy. You tell yourself they have a lot going on. You tell yourself they would help you if they could. You keep creating explanations because accepting the truth would force you to reconsider the relationship. And people often tolerate one-sided relationships because they are emotionally invested in the history. But history doesn't make a relationship healthy. A relationship is defined by what repeatedly happens in the present. If someone has needed you 20 times and supported you once, that ratio tells you something. If you know everything about their problems, but they know almost nothing about yours, that tells you something. If conversations consistently revolve around what you can provide, that tells you something. You don't need perfect equality. Relationships naturally become uneven sometimes. There will be seasons when one person needs more support. That's normal. The problem begins when imbalance becomes the permanent structure, when you're always the giver and they are always the receiver, you aren't experiencing generosity anymore. You're experiencing dependency. And dependency can become entitlement. Eventually, they stop saying thank you. They start expecting. Your help becomes assumed. Your time becomes assumed. Your attention becomes assumed. And the moment you finally say no, they act as though you betrayed them. This reaction reveals something important. They weren't upset because you changed. They were upset because their access changed. That's why boundaries are such a powerful diagnostic tool. A genuine person may be disappointed when you cannot help, but they will understand. A person who feels entitled to you may become angry. They may guilt trip you. They may remind you of everything they've supposedly done for you. They may suddenly question your character. Don't let that pressure you into reopening the door. Your kindness is a gift. It is not a debt. You don't owe unlimited access to anyone simply because you helped them before. And you don't have to keep proving that you're a good person by sacrificing your time, money, energy, and peace. There is a type of person you can never truly help because they have made one decision that blocks every possibility of growth. They refuse to take responsibility for their own life. They always have an explanation. The boss caused the failure. Their partner caused the argument. Their friends caused the betrayal. Their parents caused their problems. The economy caused their financial situation. Someone else made them angry. Someone else forced them to behave badly. And when something goes wrong, their first instinct is not to ask, "What did I do?" Their first instinct is to ask, "Whose fault is this?" That question reveals everything. Because responsibility is the foundation of change. If you believe every problem in your life is caused by someone else, then logically you have no reason to change yourself. You wait for everyone around you to change. You wait for circumstances to become perfect. You wait for people to apologize. You wait for the world to become fair. And while you are waiting, the same patterns continue. This is why you must be careful about becoming the permanent rescuer of someone who refuses responsibility. You can give them advice. They will explain why it won't work. You can give them an opportunity. They will explain why it isn't fair. You can introduce them to someone. They will explain why that person is the problem. You can show them exactly what they are doing wrong. They will find a reason why they had no choice. Eventually, you realize something uncomfortable. They don't actually want solutions. They want confirmation. They want someone to agree that their circumstances are responsible for everything happening in their life. And if you disagree, you become part of the problem. This creates a psychological trap. You start spending your energy trying to convince them to see reality differently. You explain, you argue, you provide evidence, you offer examples, you repeat yourself. But responsibility cannot be forced into someone. A person has to choose it. And until they do, your help can become completely ineffective. There is a powerful difference between someone who says, "I made a mistake," and someone who says, "Look what they made me do." The first person has somewhere to begin. The second person has nowhere to begin because the entire problem exists outside themselves. The person who accepts responsibility can change their behavior, they can change their habits, they can change their standards, they can change their environment, they can make different decisions. But the person who refuses responsibility keeps waiting for external circumstances to rescue them. And if you constantly rescue them yourself, you become another external circumstance they depend on. This is where you need boundaries. Don't become someone's permanent therapist, financial safety net, crisis manager, or emotional dumping ground simply because you feel sorry for them. Compassion is valuable. But compassion without boundaries can become self-destruction. You can care about someone's pain without accepting responsibility for their choices. You can understand why they behave the way they do without excusing everything they do. You can acknowledge their difficult circumstances without pretending they have no control. There is almost always something within a person's control. Maybe they can't control what happened to them, but they can often control what they do next. Maybe they didn't choose the situation, but they can choose their response. Maybe someone hurt them, but they still have responsibility for how they treat everyone afterward. This distinction separates people who grow from people who remain trapped. Watch how someone responds when you point out their contribution to a problem. Do they become curious? Do they reflect? Do they ask questions? Do they say you're right? Or do they immediately become defensive? Do they attack you? Do they change the subject? Do they bring up something you did months ago? Do they turn themselves into the victim? Pay attention, because accountability often feels uncomfortable before it becomes empowering. A person who wants growth eventually learns to tolerate that discomfort. They stop needing to be right. They stop needing everyone else to be wrong. They begin asking a better question. What part of this can I control? That question gives them power. And that's why you should never waste your life trying to save someone who refuses to ask it. You cannot build a better life for someone who keeps handing their responsibility to everyone around them. You can open a door. You can offer a hand. You can show them another way. But they have to walk. Otherwise, every solution you provide will eventually become another excuse for why they still haven't changed. There is a type of person who loves your kindness but hates your boundaries. As long as you say yes, they are comfortable. As long as you answer immediately, they are satisfied. As long as you make yourself available, they call you caring, loyal, generous, and understanding. But the moment you say no, something changes. Suddenly you're selfish. Suddenly you've changed. Suddenly you don't care anymore. And sometimes they will make you feel guilty simply because you decided that your time, energy, and attention have limits. This is one of the clearest signs that someone may not value you as a person as much as they value your access. Healthy relationships can survive boundaries. Unhealthy relationships often depend on their absence. Think about what happens when you stop doing something you've always done for someone. Maybe you stop answering late-night calls. Maybe you stop lending money. Maybe you stop solving their problems. Maybe you stop explaining yourself. Maybe you simply say, I can't do that. A respectful person might be disappointed. They might ask why. They might need time to adjust, but they won't try to punish you for having a limit. Someone who feels entitled to you may react completely differently. They may become angry. They may give you the silent treatment. They may accuse you of being selfish. They may remind you of all the times they supposedly helped you. They may say, after everything I've done for you? And suddenly, you're defending yourself for something that should never have required a defense. This is where many people lose control of their own lives. They become addicted to keeping everyone comfortable. They say yes when they mean no. They agree when they disagree. They stay available when they're exhausted. They tolerate disrespect because they're afraid of disappointing someone. And eventually, resentment begins growing underneath their kindness. The problem isn't that they care too much. The problem is that they have never learned where their responsibility ends and another person's begins. A boundary is simply a line that tells people where your responsibility stops. It says, I care about you, but I will not sacrifice myself to manage your emotions. It says, I respect you, but I also respect myself. It says, you are allowed to make your choices, and I am allowed to decide what I will participate in. That's not cruelty. That's psychological stability. And the interesting thing about boundaries is that they reveal character. Before you establish a boundary, you may not know exactly what someone expects from you. But after you establish one, their reaction gives you information. If they respect it, there is a foundation for a healthy relationship. If they constantly challenge it, guilt you, manipulate you, or punish you, you've learned something important. Your boundary didn't create the problem, it exposed the problem. This is why you should stop explaining yourself endlessly. The more you explain, the more opportunities you give someone to negotiate. You say, I can't help because I'm tired. They say, it won't take long. You say, I don't have the money. They say, you'll get it back next week. You say, I need some time alone. They say, you're avoiding me. Suddenly, your boundary has become a debate. It doesn't have to be. No is a complete decision. You don't need to make someone agree with your boundary before you're allowed to have one. And you don't need permission to protect your peace. Of course, boundaries should not become weapons. You shouldn't use them to control people. You shouldn't create arbitrary rules just to punish someone. The purpose of a boundary is not to control another person's behavior. It is to control your participation. You cannot force someone to respect your time, but you can decide what you will do when they don't. You cannot force someone to speak respectfully, but you can end the conversation when they become disrespectful. You cannot force someone to stop demanding your attention, but you can stop responding every time they demand it. That is where your power exists, not in controlling them, in controlling your access, your response, your availability, and your choices. There is a type of person who will support you as long as your growth does not threaten their position in your life. They are comfortable with the version of you they already know, the version that doubts itself, the version that asks for permission, the version that stays available, the version that doesn't challenge anyone, the version that has dreams but rarely acts on them. But the moment you begin changing, their attitude changes with you. You become more disciplined. You start taking your goals seriously. You become more confident. You stop seeking approval. You start protecting your time. You develop higher standards. And suddenly, someone who once seemed supportive begins questioning everything you're doing. Why are you taking this so seriously? You're becoming different. Who do you think you are? You used to be more fun. Don't get too confident. That probably won't work. These statements can sound harmless. Sometimes they are even disguised as jokes. But repeated often enough, they begin serving a purpose. They pull you back toward the identity you are trying to outgrow. And this is one of the most dangerous forms of social pressure, because it rarely arrives as direct opposition. People rarely say, I want you to fail. Instead, they create doubt. They question your decisions. They make your ambition look ridiculous. They remind you of your previous failures. They compare you to people who gave up. They tell you to be realistic when what they really mean is, don't become someone I can't recognize. You have to learn to distinguish concern from control. Someone who genuinely cares about you may question your decisions. They may warn you about risks. They may disagree with your plan. That's not necessarily negativity. The difference is what happens afterward. A genuine person wants you to think carefully and make your own decision. A controlling person wants you to abandon the decision because your growth makes them uncomfortable. That distinction matters. Because sometimes the people closest to you are the people most invested in keeping you predictable, not because they are evil. Sometimes they simply built their relationship with an older version of you. When you change, the balance changes, your priorities change, your availability changes, your confidence changes, your tolerance changes, and suddenly the old relationship no longer works the same way. This can make people uncomfortable, but their discomfort does not mean your growth is wrong. You have to understand something about human behavior. People become accustomed to patterns. If you have always answered immediately, people expect immediate answers. If you have always tolerated disrespect, people expect unlimited tolerance. If you have always been uncertain, people become comfortable making decisions around you. When you change the pattern, everyone connected to you has to adjust. Some will adjust with you. Others will try to pull you back. That is where you must become very careful. Never shrink yourself simply because someone else feels threatened by your expansion. You don't need to apologize for becoming disciplined. You don't need to feel guilty for wanting more. You don't need to hide your ambition to make insecure people comfortable. And you certainly don't need to remain mediocre so someone else can feel equal to you. But there is another trap. Sometimes people become so focused on proving others wrong that they allow those people to control them indirectly. They say, "I'll show them." They make decisions purely to demonstrate superiority. They turn their entire life into a response to criticism. That is still control. Real independence means you stop organizing your life around other people's approval or disapproval. You don't grow because someone doubted you. You grow because you decided growth was necessary. You don't become successful to make someone regret underestimating you. You become successful because you have somewhere you want to go. Your attention should be directed toward the future, not toward proving the past wrong. Watch the people around you when you succeed. Do they celebrate without making it about themselves? Do they ask questions because they are genuinely interested? Do they encourage your next step? Or do they immediately minimize what happened? You're just lucky. It won't last. Anyone could do that. Don't get too comfortable. Pay attention to repeated behavior. One comment means little. A pattern means something. And when you identify someone who repeatedly tries to make you smaller, you don't necessarily need a confrontation. Sometimes distance is more powerful than an argument. Share less, explain less, seek less approval. Let your actions become private. Your goals do not need an audience. Your growth does not require permission. And your future does not need to be approved by people who are emotionally attached to the person you used to be. There is a difference between forgiving someone and giving them access to you again. Many people confuse the two. They believe that if they forgive someone, they must forget what happened. They believe that if someone apologizes, everything should return to normal. They believe that being a good person means giving endless chances. But trust doesn't work that way. Trust is not restored by words. It is restored by consistent behavior over time. Anyone can apologize. Anyone can cry. Anyone can promise that they have changed. Anyone can tell you, "I'll never do it again." But the real question is not what they say immediately after hurting you. The real question is what they do when the moment passes. Do they change their behavior? Do they accept responsibility without excuses? Do they understand why their actions damage the relationship? Do they make different decisions when the same opportunity appears again? Because betrayal becomes dangerous when it turns into a cycle. The first betrayal may be a mistake. The second one is information. The third one is a pattern. And once the pattern becomes clear, continuing to give the same level of access is no longer simply forgiveness. It is ignoring evidence. Imagine trusting someone with something important. You tell them something private, and they expose it. They apologize. You forgive them. Months later, they do it again. Another apology, another promise, another chance. Then it happens again. At some point, you have to stop asking, do they deserve forgiveness? And start asking, do they deserve access? Those are completely different questions. You can forgive someone without trusting them. You can care about someone without allowing them close to you. You can wish someone well without inviting them back into the same position they previously abused. Forgiveness can release resentment. Trust determines access, and access should be earned. One of the biggest mistakes people make is allowing an apology to erase the evidence of behavior. They hear the right words and immediately lower their guard. But words are cheap when there is no behavioral change behind them. If someone genuinely changes, you won't need to force yourself to believe them. Their behavior will gradually make belief easier. They will become more consistent, more accountable, more careful, more transparent. They won't demand that you trust them immediately. They will understand that trust takes time to rebuild. That distinction is extremely important. A person who truly regrets what they did will usually understand why you are cautious. A person who simply wants their access restored may become angry because you aren't trusting them fast enough. They may say, "I already apologized," but an apology is not a command. You don't owe immediate trust because someone said sorry. Trust is not something another person can demand. It is something they demonstrate. This is why you should watch behavior after conflict. When someone hurts you, don't become hypnotized by emotional conversations. Watch what happens over the following weeks and months. Does the behavior change when nobody is watching? Does the person become more responsible? Do they stop repeating the same actions? Do they respect your boundaries? Do they become more consistent? That is where real evidence lives. And there is another important lesson here. You don't have to punish people who betray you. Punishment keeps you emotionally connected to them. You don't need revenge. You don't need to expose them. You don't need to make them suffer. Sometimes the strongest response is simply reducing access. You become less available. You share less. You trust more slowly. You observe more carefully. You stop giving someone the opportunity to repeatedly hurt you. That is not bitterness. That is learning. Your past experiences should not make you suspicious of everyone, but they should make you wiser about whom you trust. There is a difference between having walls and having standards. Walls keep everyone out. Standards determine who gets closer. And standards are built from experience. You don't need to become cold because someone betrayed you. You need to become selective. Not everyone deserves the same version of you. Not everyone deserves your secrets. Not everyone deserves your loyalty. Not everyone deserves unlimited chances. Your trust is valuable because it exposes something real about you. So don't give it to people who repeatedly demonstrate that they don't know how to handle it. Forgive if forgiveness gives you peace. Let go if letting go gives you freedom. But remember what the behavior taught you. Because forgiveness can close the wound, but wisdom prevents you from handing the same person the knife twice. The strongest person isn't the one who never forgives. It is the one who can forgive without becoming foolish, care without becoming dependent, and walk away without needing revenge. Protect your peace. Protect your standards. And when someone's behavior repeatedly tells you who they are, believe the pattern instead of waiting for another promise.